I want to thank Allison Kahn for coming to speak today and tell us about her one of her most recent endeavors. Um, Allison is a senior research tutorial fellow, material, virtual and digital anthropology at the Stanford University Overseas Program here in Oxford, and is also a visiting fellow in digital learning systems at Loughborough University. She did her PhD here in Oxford. Am I right about that? In anthropology. Was that with Marcus Banks?
Yep, among others.
Among others. And has been involved in all sorts of interesting research ever since, including research with the Naga in India. I met Allison a couple of years ago and had the pleasure of participating in the first run of her digital filmmaking course, her documentary filmmaking course here in Oxford at the Stanford Center, which was an awful lot of fun. And she did tell me at the time that she was sort of planning a film. I think it's your first foray into documentary film. Is that right? Into ethnographic filmmaking?
I have made others before, but this was quite a unique experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And she is going to talk today about the experience of making this film, We the Zine. Some of you may have received the link that we circulated earlier to the film itself. And specifically to talk about the use of social media involved in the production of this film, if I've got that right, Allison.
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to you in that case. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And do turn on your cameras if you like, so I can have an audience, because sometimes it becomes a little bit more convivial when we can both see each other's faces. So Bill, keep yours on, please, so I can see you. But if anyone else would like to show their faces, that's really cool as well. Just because it's just nice to have some warmth and some faces across that cyberspace. Thank you very much. Well, yes, thank you. So I am here today to talk about the film, and it was a very interesting foray into filmmaking in India. Although I had been to India several times, I'm of Indian descent, so my father's from India, so I have quite a lot of cultural knowledge about India. It was only about 10-11 years ago when I really started to understand that the northeast of India was quite different from the rest of India, as all the regions are, but in particular here, the Naga tribes of northeast India. And I really discovered them through finding a film at the Pitt Rivers Museum that had been there for quite some time, but I found that it'd been made by a woman called Ursula Graham Bauer. And this 16mm film had been in the Pitt Rivers archives, along with another woman's film, Beatrice Blackwood's film. And I got some funding from the British Film Institute to digitize this, and this was back when a lot of people hadn't really started digitizing their film archives. They'd started doing the photography archives, but especially at the Pitt Rivers they hadn't started the film archives. So this was sort of a really interesting method into trying to find what was going on and look at another platform, another source of research that had been done before. And obviously we have a lot of Naga artifacts at the Pitt Rivers. So after that endeavor, I started to understand who the Naga people were. And really interestingly, the film that was made by Ursula Graham Bauer, which I researched, and it came out as a 4-part piece with Beatrice Blackwood as well, attached to the Pitt Rivers, was called Captured by Women. And that was in 2011. But following Ursula Graham Bauer's story, it led me to her daughter who lives in India. And through her, I had some connections to go back and to meet some people from the Naga tribes. And so it was really interesting that the film that I had digitized in 2010-11 was going to be the same Naga tribe that was going to put on the Zemi Olympics 10 years later. So when I did go back in 2019, I took the film, the video footage that I digitized 10 years before and met the descendants of the people whose fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers were all in the film. So it was a wonderful experience, just as that part of a methodology, as the archive in action. But today I'm really going to talk about what happened next, you know, what happened when we decided in January 2019, I was in India. The lady with whom I was working at the University of Delhi, Professor Zemo, told me her husband was the president of the Zemi Olympic Film Committee, and they decided to get the Zemi Naga communities together for the first time since partition. So this was an 80-year gap, and many had been living in, they live in Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, and all over India and indeed the world. And many are working in universities, and they have a great outreach of people. And it wasn't just about the Zemi Nagas, but many people from other tribes attended the Zemi Olympics. But this was really the story of the Zemi Nagas trying to get together for the first time. I was extremely interested. They asked me to, I was invited on an official basis to go and film for them, because they had no way of documenting it in an official way. They would Everybody has smartphones in Nagaland. It's not that they don't have access to media or anything like that, but they wanted me to come as a visual anthropologist, as a friend of the family, to see what I could do. And they really wanted to spread the message beyond Nagaland, and they were very excited about this. So I said I would try, I'll do what I could to come out, and I brought my family as well. My two younger sons came with me. They were aged 7 and 10 at the time, and my husband came as well. And it became a family, but also ex-students of mine came from India and from Oxford, and we created a sort of motley crew as we made our way up to Jaluki for this incredible event. So here I'm going to share some slides with you, so you can we can talk through some of the more, let's say, intricate details of that experience. So I'm going to share my screen, if you bear with me, and we'll go from here. Okay, nod if you can see that. Yeah, brilliant. So here today we're looking at liminal. Right. We're looking at the liminal and collaborative methodologies in ethnographic filmmaking, and in particular the role of social media and how it affected both the event and the filmmaking process. So next. So what is ethnographic film? I think everybody here is quite understands what ethnographic film is within anthropology, so quite familiar with this term. But here, let's just summarize. It's usually some theoretical consideration or inspiration behind the making of an ethnographic film, traditionally focusing on minority groups and small-scale societies, but now not necessarily so. But here, I think we know that a lot of films are made with ethnographic content, but not necessarily with an anthropological approach. So here we look at reflecting on the ethnographic method as used in ethnographic fieldwork. As we can see, in the past, it's been pretty prescriptive. And when we've had to really sort of look at films in festivals and student contributions to the canon, Haider was one of the criteria. He gave some of the criteria that we tend to look at, and ethnographic films tend to look at this kind of understanding and approach that, for example, 9, that there is a certain reflexivity within the film, that the ethnographic's presence, the ethnographer's presence is acknowledged in some way, that the whole body, there's an understanding that we're not just looking at a tiny part of the culture, that it's reflecting something larger. So I'm sure you've all seen this grid before. So I'm just looking at some background to the traditional ways that we tend to look at what ethnographic film is. And we document life as it is in relation to humans' material existence. And we focus on areas of social life that give insight into wider beliefs and social practices, organizations, family, institutional structures, and connections between them. These are some of the approaches that we use. We look at daily routines, crafts, food, preparation, games, body, decorations, rituals, and rites. And we try to add insight into how we read the external as a reflection of the internal through language, codes, beliefs, attitudes, and prejudice. So David McDougall is, as always, one of my main inspirations. And I particularly like David's approach because he doesn't set things in canon. He doesn't say this is how you do it. He's very experiential and he's very reflective about his own work in ways that go beyond some of the more formal and straitjacketed ways that ethnographic film has often been depicted and studied. So The Looking Machine is his latest book, and I've read The Corporeal Image and all his other work, but the Corporeal Image and The Looking Machine are particularly influential in the way I go about studying film and working with David. I'm working with him at the moment on a study with about digital children, that he's been sort of a consultant with me on this. But I tend to ask David what he thinks of certain approaches. But here I am introducing a concept, and I know that this is a concept that is old as the hills in anthropology, this idea of liminality. But I was particularly struck by the several layers of liminality that we really came across in making this film, and with regard to social media, but also with regard to elements of the audience and the content itself, which was sport. And sport is also seen as a liminal experience in culture. So etymologically, liminality was used by Van Gennep earlier as 1909. And we know that it's derived from Latin limes, threshold, or limen, boundary or limit, but it means the same root. It's about where two things can be seen. So where we see that the edge of something. So the concept has clear connotations with marginality and margins, both geographical and socio-cultural. And Van Gennep said that liminal rituals known as rites of passage occurred in 3 stages: separation from ordinary social life, margin or limen, meaning threshold, when the subjects of ritual fall into a limbo between their past and present modes of daily existence, and reaggregation, where they are ritually returned to secular or mundane life, either at a higher status level or in an altered state of consciousness of being. So these were the 3, if you like, stages of liminality that we then see Turner using, but influenced by Van Gennep. And Turner used this in his book, The Forest of Symbols, Aspects of Nemdu Ritual, in 1967. Shields uses Turner's concept of liminality to describe and analyze places on the margin, those towns and regions which have been left behind in the modern race for progress, and where the also geographic marginality is also a mark of being a social periphery. So when Victor Turner's contemporary cultural performance, this is an interesting set of essays, and chapter 6 looks at Sharon Rose studies sport as a liminal aspect of this kind of liminal experience. And in anthropological study, it's seen, we can look at it as a liminal in the zone of being in that transfixed state, very much in that Turner going through a ritual and really coming through something. And I sometimes describe it as in the present continuous. It's something that continues and until one comes out of it, almost like some kind of ritual or rite or an altered state of being. Whereas liminoid shares an aspect of that liminal experience. So it can be fleeting rather than a continuous experience where one is changed in some way, as in previous rites that we've looked at through a girl becoming woman or a boy becoming man. In a way, sport is seen in a way as these is a moment in time where you're outside normal time, but you're not really outside the culture in the same way, and you haven't changed in such to such a degree. And here communitas is another word which we look at, and in this case it's really looking at how different the normal society of the Zemi were changed during this Zemi-Olympic experience. So, hang on a second. So when I talk about collaboration, hang on a second, I've gone back. Let me go back a bit, sorry. Yeah. So when I talk about making the film, and when I'm talking about collaboration, I've been asked to sort of explain, what do I mean by collaborative mode in ethnography? What does that mean? And so I sort of put down a few of the things that, in a way, a few of the methods that I used before I went to Nagaland, before we actually began filming. So anything up to the filming process we call pre-production. So this constant communication with the people who are organizing the Olympics, the discussion before a camera is used about the nature of the film and who the stakeholders are, the team building of local talent. So when I was asked to go, I said, I will go to film, but it mustn't be my voice. It must be the voice of the Zemi filming themselves. And so they offered to get in touch with some local filmmakers, young men who hadn't really made films, but they'd made music videos, or they were interested in photography. A couple had their own cameras, but I brought some cameras with me. And we really had a sort of workshop before we started, a sort of a day workshop describing what do I mean by documentary? Why would we do this? What kind of things are we looking for? So the teams were built in cameramen, sound. We found 8 teams. So we had 16 young men working with us. Some were from India, but the rest of the other parts of India. But the main 4-5 teams were Zemi themselves. And so we really sort of discussed all along from the beginning, who would own the footage, the identity of the social structure, to create a workflow, and listen to concerns and explain intentions for the production stage. So we really had a sort of a brief of, this is why we're here. We've got a week, we've got 7 days, and this is how we'll go about it. And everyone sort of took part in that discussion. During the 7 days, it was a real sort of 16-hour day phenomena. That's why everyone bonded so much, because we were working together all the time. And we established a routine. We had to have a structure. We had to define roles and expectation and create camera teams, some which weren't working perhaps so well, or we joined 2 teams up because there were sometimes 3 events happening at the same time. And we were also encouraging the film teams to try to get some interviews from the audience, try to get maybe to find somebody's story, because it's very difficult when you just arrive at an event such as this. You don't know the backstory of the participants. The one thing that I will do if we go again is we really need to track the progress of the villages. There were 106 villages that took part in this event. And so when we arrived the first day, there were 15,000 people crowded around the main stadium, which was a big football pitch. And every day, every evening, I had to watch a lot of the footage to see whether there was any potential for the film. So if I needed to ask the guys to go back and refilm or get a better sound, because always the big problem when you're filming outdoors and sort of on the hoof is the sound is always not as good as it should be. So we tried to do that and tried to find a few stories and just get some human contact and try to find a little bit more about the event on the edges. And so the relationship between the film crew and the local informants built, and every evening we sat round a fire and we ate together, and we were hosted by different families around the villages, and so it was really a very communal experience. And then we went home, and I had footage every night. We uploaded footage and we saved it, we archived it on each day, each camera. So we were very organized about the wrangling of the data. But then I went home with about 65 hours of footage, and it was quite a daunting prospect to put it together in some way. And the only person that I knew well who was in the Olympics was Jeremiah, who was the president. And I'd asked him before if I could trail him a bit during the event, because he was the only one who I knew I could get quite close to, and where he was, there was going to be action. So I used him for the narrative thread throughout, and I thought that we would get some reveal of him, like his motivations for creating the Olympics. So when we got back, I had a lot of footage that I didn't understand. It was in Zemi. There's Northern Zemi and Southern Zemi, which I found out about. And I used Facebook as a way to research. So I'd put up little clips. There are about 7,000 members on the Zemi Olympics Facebook group. So when I put up little pieces, little clips from the event, within minutes, someone would have recognized that person. They would tell me which village they came from and what they were saying. So it was amazing. And sometimes there's a little bit of a back and forth between the Zemi commenting on the film footage. So it was very interesting to watch the kind of internal politics, as it were, going on Facebook. And we made sure we got names for everyone, and we showed the edit to everybody. So before we put it out beyond the Zemi community themselves, we asked for feedback. And there was one very interesting moment where one of the young men who was narrating in the film had attributed a song to his grandfather. But then when the Zemi community watched it, they said, that's not his grandfather, that's my grandfather. So there was this really interesting dispute between whose grandfather had invented this song, and eventually we got the elderly chap to sing it. So it wasn't the young man who sang his apparent grandfather's song, it was the guy himself who sang it. So that was a really interesting moment of attribution of history, and every, as we know, there are lots of different uncles, and the kinship systems work differently there, as we found out on Facebook. And then we screened it, and we shared the footage. So now we're building a website to share all the footage, so many people can make many films. And I want to sort of point out that this is one film that we could make, and I wanted to make it quite shortly after, because obviously everyone went down into lockdown within a couple of 2 or 3 months of us returning. And this was we were asked constantly, have you done the film? Have you made the film? And I tried to get it done as quickly as I could by that summer of 2020, because it seemed to bring a lot of joy to people reminiscing the time of 2019. It was like, this was the time, this was before we were all locked down. This was the life before what we have now. So it was a really interesting, talk about the idea of liminality. It was a very interesting moment in time when this film was made, because it captured a moment before things changed. So looking at Facebook as a liminal space, I just wanted to point out a few elements here, and really moving towards not just conditions of collaboration for a film, but conditions for collaboration full stop. So here, cyberspace, and Facebook provided a cyberspace outside the realm of normal decision making for the Zemi. You'll hear in a minute, I'll show a clip, but Jeremiah, the president, he is still quite a young man. He's probably late 30s now. And he and his educated friends, let's say, mostly in Delhi, thought that this would be a good idea because they yearn for people to be together. This separation of the Zemi over 3 states is a boundary that they cannot abide. And as we know, there's been a lot of political upset over many, many years. It's a very sensitive issue. And I know that Jeremiah felt that he owed it to his people to try to bring them together. So this structure on Facebook was quite an interesting form of collaboration between sort of semi-elders. They're not the elders, but they're kind of they're the up and coming elders in some way. And so in terms of how the event was created, was a liminal space. It was a space outside their normal community decision-making process. And social media provided a space that broke physical boundaries between the local level. And that's why at the beginning, when I announced my speech, I put this quotation about roads. Roads are a massive problem in Northeast India. There aren't many good ones. People cannot see each other easily. It took us hours and hours to get up a bumpy track to get to Jaluki in the first place. And we could see people, if we wanted to invest, people I'm sure would invest in suspension and in cars going over all the bumps there, because the roads are terrible. So Facebook provided a place where people could talk together. And I'm not just saying Facebook because it could be any social media platform. It just happens that the Zemi use Facebook at the moment. They may go on to use others. And so also it allowed a level of organization of the film team to enter into a collaborative space and record the event on film. So we were sort of brought it on board because it was easy. It was easy to do. They could see who we were quite quickly over a Facebook discussion. And it also affected the expectations of the event itself, because when the organizing committees on the local level, at the village level, heard that there was a film crew from Oxford coming, it was really interesting how this kind of changed. This is what I heard back, was that people were saying, oh, you know, there's going to be an international audience. We're going to have to really do our best. So this it also sort of there was a certain liminal sort of presence of this kind of this team that was moving towards them, and that would be recording the event. So the film became part of the event in a very strange way that I had not predicted. And the audience here, so let me actually, am I going to show you? Yeah. So let me just share with you a couple of things before I go on anymore. I'm just going to show you a little bit of how Jeremiah saw this. So hold on a second. I'm just going to the film. Okay. Screen share. Okay, can you see? Right. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yes, that's
okay,
fine.
Great. Okay. So I'm just going to show, this is Jeremiah Pame, who is the president of the Zemi Olympics.
Maybe around 4 or 5 years ago. And I thought of this and I shared with some of my friends, why don't we do something to bring our people together? especially people in the villages. So if there is any kind of conference or seminar, only the educated people, the leaders, they will go. And the same thing will happen again and again. And only those people in the town, they'll come together. So what could be the way, the only way for people in the villages to come together? We have different religions and we live in different states created by the state's boundary. So the only thing was sports. Then I put up about this idea on 25th November 2018 on Facebook. Shall we organize one sports event for Zeme people? And everybody started pouring in with 7,000 members on Facebook group. They started, let's do it, let's do it. Then fine, then we called for a meeting on 15 December 2018, there in Delhi. So we called people from Assam, Manipur, and Nagaland who are staying in Delhi. Then we decided we should go ahead. Let's go ahead, let's do it. Then the moment we spread the idea about this, at the end of 2018, people were already excited and there was no way for us to go back.
Okay.
Zeme have
Okay. So I'm just going to come out of that again. And 21. All right. So sorry, I'll go to 21. So this is one of, this is a professor at a university in Delhi talking about her research and how the experience of the Olympics had affected her. I'll just play this now.
I have done my research on folk media, but I have not seen these kind of practical things because, like, for example, there used to be a season among the Zemis. Say, for example, if you have to say a kind of musical instruments, we call it Indra. So they say that when I want to hear this kind of Indra also, they say that they cannot play during any seasons. It has to be played only after the harvest season. So that is why it is, although I have done a research in that area, I cannot listen to these kind of musics and all. But here, even the fire making, I know how people used to make, but I've never seen. So I have seen these things, although there are so many events like wrestling and all. So we have seen that this kind of wrestling and all, these are like, we know that it is happening, but live watching, and we being an organizers, bringing people from different places. So it is like, we could see that how our people are also doing well in this kind of games and sports and all. So it's quite exciting for me also being the part of the organizing team. And like, it's, I'm proud to be the part of the team.
Okay, so I'll just go back to the slides here. Stop share and then back to share. So, can you see this?
Yeah,
Okay.
fine.
So that's one example, just talking about the liminality of traditional activities normally, and whereby it's very difficult to actually see them because of the difficult access to villages that still practice certain traditional crafts, and fire making is only done officially on certain occasions, and so it was an interesting bringing together. I'm talking about communitas as well, where all the hierarchies of different types of rituals came together on an equal platform. I'll talk a little bit maybe more about that in a second, but the audience was also, both in the event and in the film, a very interesting aspect of this idea of using liminal space. So the audience plays an intrinsic role in the collaborative method of the filmmaking itself. The audience plays for the film. People know they're being filmed, and some came towards the camera, and some had spontaneously were asked. So the opening scene, I'll play in a second, was of a lady who sang a traditional folk song that she had not prepared to sing at the time, but she was asked because somebody knew that she knew this very, very old song. And we asked whether, I said, go and ask if she would sing it for us for the film. So this was so the crew were also provocative in a way. They provoked action to happen. And also in the crowd, when the young boys paint their faces and their movements in the film, in next to the volleyball match, it almost sort of comes together almost like a dance. It's almost like two performative acts happening at the same time. And so the young Zemi were both, they were spectators, but they also were watching from afar. They were watching on Facebook through live streaming. So this was, another moment of, the film, the event was being live streamed. It affected the expectations. The film affected the expectations. The film became part of the event, and also this inversion of the young people taking precedence. And normally in an event, the young people would be listening to the elders, and they would be hierarchically in a, say, let's say, a separate, maybe more passive at some time situation, whereas here the young Zemi took precedent, but it was an act of it was wanted by the elders. The elders wanted the young Zemi to meet other young Zemi from other regions. They felt it was very important for the continuation of the tribe that they knew each other. And this was a moment that was talked about by another scholar, talking about anti-structure. The way that the communitas was inverted. So normally the elders would be leading, but here the elders stood back and allowed the young to take the lead. And modern sports, ritual sports, and traditional activities interrelated, and there are examples of different types of liminal and liminoid spaces. So I'm just going to show you another couple of clips. Just find this. So here I'm going to, well, first of all, the song. I'm going to just a little bit of the song. This was completely impromptu. Oh, hang on. Share screen.
Bầu bè pai là điên dẻo đã nằm tiêu lâu bè già bè bè ram là già lâu ram già lu kê cái ta này có tiếng tuổi bè ram là dẻo.
We'll go back a bit more. Sorry.
Phải là điên dẻo đã nằm ram y lây ram tiếng tung tiếng vang làm dệt sang bè lúa ria y lui mê ra mi ngâu sang kẻ lạc bầm bè bầu bè pai là điên dẻo đã nằm tiêu lâu bè già bè bè ram là già lâu.
Okay, so that was completely impromptu, and before I had it translated, when I just heard it in the evening when the guys came back with this, and we'd seen this lady, and I said, did you catch her singing? And they said yes, she agreed to sing. And it was so moving to listen to this wonderful song. And I said, that just sounds like she's singing of the hills. It just sounds like she, and when they translated, she was singing, well, of course, with this nothing but hills. But, it was just a very wonderful moment of, this is beautiful. It was almost aesthetic as well as, being a wonderful insight into the audience. This was the audience. This wasn't what we'd come to film really, but it just happened to be. And then I'll just show you one more here. yeah, these were funny guys. They were also impromptu. They got their faces painted, and they were really active in the crowd, and yeah, and they made quite a lot of noise. So what's the bit before? I'm sorry. Sometimes hard to get it just exactly. It's 3-2. Okay, but before we got them getting their faces painted as well, so it was quite nice. Here we are. It was quite nice to find them in the crowd later. Okay, so you get the idea that they wanted to be seen, and there's some lovely face painting there. So let's go back to the last example. I won't keep you too much longer, but I'm just going to go to the last example here. Stop share, and then I'll reshare, which is this last one. The collective liminoid experience in space and time that enabled the collaborative ethnographic approach. So places of Jaluki town and Perrin town in Nagaland became loci for a liminoid diaspora. The Zemi Naga collective experience. So for once, for the first time in 80 years, there was a collective experience in the same place at the same time. And there was an intertribal collective experience because there were other tribes like the Angami, the Aoi, and other tribes there also sharing that space and putting up stalls next to the stadium and selling. And I actually went back to film a lady who was running her own cooperative on weaving. So I went back to her weaving shop, which was actually a big warehouse where she was making products that we bought some. So this was a really interesting intertribal experience of people knowing that there was an event going on, but they were also very respectful that this was a Zemi event, and they were allowed, everybody was allowed in. There was also this national collective experience of people coming from, I invited some people, some collaborators from Chennai and also from Kerala, and they were also in great admiration and great sort of, it was a wonderful experience for them too, because they said, we hear a lot about the Northeast, but none of us ever come. None of us ever actually make the effort to know these people. We know the Nagas from when they're in the cities, and they're usually very good workers, business people. They cut our hair, they give us food, they in a way they're seen in a very different way in India, and it was an eye-opener for the other Indians coming in from to the cities to see what the community was like, and this wonderful event. And then the international, obviously, collective, where we were coming in from abroad. And the film crew moved between the physical and mental spaces. So because everyone, it was a bit like a port space where everybody's a foreigner. In a way, Jaluki town hosted this event. And so we were all, in a way, everyone was in a liminal space, because their town was not usually invaded by so many people, but it was also very, very satisfying to see everybody eating and working together. So just moving on from there. So what new light can the concept of liminality shed on our ongoing fieldwork and, and organisation and management processes? What more recent theoretical and conceptual developments mean for our understanding of the concept of liminality? How can we use liminality as part of the process and methodology in ethnographic filmmaking? And I'll sort of finish on this, that it's really these conditions for collaboration that is most important for me, to ask what is a community and what is governance, because making a film, there is also a political aspect to making any kind of film. And for me, it was the attitude of empathetic thinking that made the whole experience, pre-production and post-production. The film was really well received from the Zemi community, which was my first audience that I wanted to please. The local societal decision making can be separated from national government. So the Zemi paid for this themselves. They didn't ask for money from anybody. So we're looking at, you know, the governments and what happens when people work outside the formal structures of government and the societal decision-making models. And the main thing that worked was that people dedicated time and trust, and there was an accountability to each other. And this devolved power meant that every sector, everyone involved was valued. So how people think and the capacity to join in discussions, which was enabled in many ways by the social media platforms, made it a local, inclusive, collective and community building experience. And I just wondered, you know, how we could build on this and think of more community collaborative models. I know there are many, many out there, but this was one experience. So thank you very much. And I'd like to, you know, just to ask anybody if they have any questions, really.
And thank you very much, Alison. Really interesting stuff. I've got questions, but I think I'll save them up. Do people in the audience want to either raise their hands or put something in the chat? Neil has raised his hand. Thank you. Over to you, Neil.
Hi, thanks, David. Hi, Alison. I loved your film. I just watched it at lunchtime today, to be honest. Sorry, and then I really enjoyed your talk. So thanks. That's great. And one of the things I really liked about the film was I could feel the continuity between the kind of aims of the Olympics and the aims of the film. I mean, they really felt like they were coming from the same place or part of the same kind of effort. And so one tiny part of me thought, is there any kind of cost to that? Like, do you? It's like the strengths are really kind of strong and really clear to me. So it's not that I'm in any way trying to undercut them. It just made me think about a friend of mine who's just finished a PhD on activist groups in mental health. And she's worked really closely with groups who are trying to go against the grain, a little bit against the mainstream in rethinking mental health care and resisting aspects of mental health care. And she said that she sort of reflected, I mean, this is a sort of over coffee kind of conversation, but she like reflected, well, the problem is I find it hard to critique anything because I sort of feel that I have to be on their side. I owe them my loyalty. These guys, the activist groups, they're like everyone's shitting on them basically. So you know, like she feels she has to support and she has to, and she said, well, maybe I would, if I had more critical distance, I might write slightly differently. And of course, your experience is going to be very different, but is there anything like that? Does that seem other things you would like to have done? Yeah, absolutely.
So, and one, and I think it all goes along the lines of respect. respect, because when you are a guest in somebody's house, you can observe things that you would do otherwise, but you don't necessarily bring it up over dinner, you sort of think, and it could be from the color of the wall to the way their children are acting, so it's really a bit like that, when you are invited to be the official filmmaker, and also that when you're representing the other, because we were the only Caucasian at the event, and so there were several things going on, and we were hosted by the Christian Baptist church, and we stayed in their guest house next to the church, and we understood very much that there was no alcohol allowed, so there were things, we were expected to go out every evening to eat with people, whether you liked it or not. And I didn't really like any of the food. And I not that I luckily I had a bit of spare flesh on me. I didn't really need to eat much, but I was also I had my own problems there, because I'd left my daughter at home for the first time ever with my mother, but she was 13, and I'd never been so far away from my own child. I had the other two with me, and I was feeling quite nervous. So when I was asked to go and eat in the middle of nowhere up a dirt track that would have taken half an hour, already in the middle of nowhere, and I'm a city girl born and bred in London, I was very nervous to go out into this wilderness I had no control over. And a couple of times I said, I don't want to go out tonight. Can I stay? I'll just make myself some pasta. And it was really frowned upon. So, so a couple of nights I just said, I'm really sorry, but I'm working on the film. But really, in my mind, I was nervous, and I knew I wasn't going to eat anything, because I mean, don't get me wrong, wonderful food at different levels. I mean, luckily I ate the vegetables, but I didn't eat the meat, and there was quite a lot of meat. And if you refused anything, it was seen quite as an insult to the host. So you had to be very careful. Luckily, the kids and my husband enjoyed all the food. They were fine, but I was it was like, why doesn't she like the food? Why isn't she eating? But making the film itself, yes. There were some events where, for example, moments where I was going to include something, and then I was asked, no. There's Northern Zemi and there's Southern Zemi. We do not want to upset. The Northerners came to see us. Don't put, this is what somebody said, oh, they've got a different accent, it's kind of funny. And no, don't put that in the film. We don't want any ambiguity, right? Ambiguity about the Christian religion. 80% are Christians, but there are animists and there are other non-denominational, whatever. We don't want to upset any community, because this is a community building exercise. So it was, that there were, not that there was any lie or cover up, there was nothing to cover up, but there was a thin line to tread. And that is why we collaborated at every moment. And I made certain decisions to, do we subtitle this? Do we not subtitle that? Certain decisions where, it was the sensitivity of our hosts that we had to be careful of. And the film was a gift. Okay, so remember that. I didn't make it for public consumption on, broadcast channel. I can't, I've worked for Discovery Channel before. I know what's at stake when you go completely commercial, and I know what's at stake when you go in and think you know better. What you have to do is you have to know who your audience is, and you can't please everybody. But I think the most important thing is that the people who are expecting you to do something for them, that you do it in the best and most honest way you can, with their views. It's their story, not mine. So I suppose, yes, there are certain decisions, take out ambiguities, because film is not as subtle as the written word, nor is it as subtle as radio. So I think it's very important to know the limitations of film.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Actually, can I follow on from that? Because you've raised one of the things that I wanted to ask about, which is, well, what part of it is about religion. So one of the side aspects which is absent from the film is the Indian state. So if there were official representatives of local government, we don't see them. And along with that is any kind of reference to this being filmed in the context of Hindu nationalism, who will be deeply, deeply upset by some of the film scenes in the film.
Which part would they be upset by?
People jumping up and holding off horns of dead bulls. That's heresy, isn't it? They don't use the word heresy.
I don't know. Well, remember the Citizen Act came into force on the second day of the Olympics when we were there. It was an extremely difficult moment to be there. And it was the tension was palpable. People couldn't leave the Zemi Olympics afterwards and go home because their towns were burning. Guwahati in Assam, when we were going home through Kolkata, we couldn't get into Kolkata because of all the demonstrations. This was a moment of real civil unrest. Now, do we make that part of the Zemi Olympics? Is it our place to bring in that? What do you include? What do you exclude? There were local officials invited, and they were there. You see them at the beginning, and we went to great lengths. The guy in charge of the water, the guy in charge head of this, head of that. Look, we had the Indian Army present. You'll see them standing around with their rifles. So they were included in the organization. They were told and they were invited. Anyone who was, and the head of the Naga representatives was there as well, the president there. So yes, they tried to include the elders who would, or the officials to get them on side as well. Now, and remember, they had asked for no money from the government. And that was really controversial in a way. That's really quite subversive to pay for it all yourself. Say, no, we're doing it, we're not asking any money. So it was really the people's event. And it could have gone wrong. But yeah, in the way about Hindu nationalism, that's a big overarching element of Indian culture. But so are many things going on all over the world at any time. Does that necessarily mean that they're part of this story? I don't think there was a place. It's too big an issue. And as I say, film wouldn't have done that justice. We couldn't have done that justice. We could only, in a way, we had to deal with the micro here. That's what we had to deal with, because the macro will contextualize it anyway because of where and when it was filmed. And that could be treated in an essay. That can be treated in a longer discussion around tribal politics.
But
remember, the Naga conflict has been going on since partition, and it's very, very sensitive even today, so you don't want to put in anything that may be misinterpreted.
It puts huge constraints on you. I mean, let alone making the film, but also what you can write about it.
Well, as a result of making this film, I was asked when it was Naga Independence Day, from the Naga separatists, asked me to show the film at their event. I said, I'm sorry, I don't know enough about Naga politics to be involved in this, because my ignorance is enormous, and sometimes ignorance is better than trying to get involved in things that you have no place in.
Do we have other questions from people on the floor? I can't see any hands.
Hello.
Oh, Faisal.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Hello. Hi. It's Wissam. Thank you so much, Alison, for the fascinating presentation and the movie. I was curious about the making of the movie itself when it comes to script vis-a-vis the end product of the movie itself. So, which thing you saw first, or you envisioned first? The script or how the movie would go, or you just went on taking videos, shooting, and then at the end, in the editing phase, the movie came together? Because this process I'm contemplating using or doing ethnographic film, but also at the methodology itself, because there is a way of an end product, but what we get to learn while doing it, we figure out, and we see things behind the camera, we don't sometimes see it with our own eyes, and vice versa. So I would like to know more about this part of making the movie itself, and how long did it take? And there's something also, people are feeling comfortable in the movie. It sounds like, how long did it take for the people to feel comfortable in front of the camera? So yeah, those questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, really, really interesting. I mean, you've asked kind of like the $1 million question there, because when I imagined what would happen when I first was speaking to Jeremiah, when he said, I'm organizing this event. This was January, at the end of a lecture tour in India. It was January, and the event was taking place in December. And all I knew is that I had to go. And I knew that I would go with I would go with the idea that Jeremiah was going to be there, and I didn't know about his story to do with his mother. I knew that he was very close to his father, and they were an amazing family altogether. They've all, come from nothing and gone, really done well. But so I knew Jeremiah, and he was very articulate and very charismatic. And I thought, I've got one character here, I wonder what the reveal will be if I get to know him a bit better. And I knew he was very religious. He was very tied to his Baptist belief, Christian belief. So my question is, what, there's the Semi-Olympics, but there's also a personal reason here. So there's the event, but there's a person who may tell us more about himself as we go along. That's why, so he, in a way, was the person that I thought, if I stick to him, then there will be a beginning, a middle, and an end to my film, because there is an event. It's not like it might happen, it was happening. So, making a documentary, an event is quite a good thing to film, because it will be there will be action. So when I went out there, I met these guys. I didn't know how many of them there would be, but I sort of organized them in a way to say, first of all, I had to teach them how to do a proper interview, because they wouldn't keep the cameras still. So the idea was, they were brilliant. I mean, can you imagine, some of those filmmakers had never really, they never made, none of them had made a documentary before. So what I wanted to do is, it's piecemeal, it's like an ingredients, right, I need some interviews, I need you to really go, and they were quite shy, they didn't really want to go into the crowd and ask people anything. So it was a sort of gradual cajoling of, we need to film the football, we need to film the volleyball, every event needs to be filmed with at least 2 cameras. So we did that. So that was kind of quite logistic. But the other, feeling comfortable, remember, it was a lot of the young Nagas themselves. If it was just me going in, it would have been, sometimes I was there, but I was there as almost like the instructor, saying, right, make sure you've got the person on the right side of the frame. I was kind of making sure that they were technically okay. And then the audience were quite endeared towards the process, that they were helping their young own filmmakers here. It wasn't just me coming in from an outside. This was me guiding their young to make films about themselves. So there was much more, and I was like seen as the maternal, it was like the mama, rather than, and the fact that my boys were with me as well, it was really good because they also struck up relationships. So it was a whole bonding that I think is really essential to making a film that seems credible and authentic. And then remember, the film is made 4 times: in your mind, in the field, when you get back, and then with the audience. So in the production process, I first of all picked out the quality of what is watchable. And then I tried to, I did organize it, but I organized all the pieces of footage in a truthful, chronological way. The events happened as I did, and that's why with all the music is made by the Zemi for the event. Every piece of music, there were 3 official songs and the choir, and I tried to build it around those 4 songs. So it was a film in 4 parts, really, if you break it down. So that's all. I was just gradually building it so that people had a sense of action, but had moments to reflect upon what was going on. And I think it wouldn't have been the same if you'd have asked people a day after. You had to ask them while it was going on, because that's when the adrenaline's up, that's when they're excited. Afterwards, there's a bit of a lull, when an event has finished. So really that's the way, but the collaboration and closeness and no hierarchy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks. Do we have any others?
I guess I can ask a question if nobody.
Yeah, please.
So thanks a lot, Alison. I was kind of interested in, you touched a little bit there for a bit on the role of social media in particular. Yeah. And if I understood you correctly, there was one of the aspects of that was it wasn't so easy for people to have much direct communication. Otherwise, transportation was difficult. People were dispersed across a wide area and in small villages. Roads were not good, et cetera, et cetera. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how that figured in, I don't know, promoting or anticipation of the event. I mean, that seems like it would be the point where people could discuss collectively. I think you sort of hinted at that. And then I guess maybe thinking a little bit about it after, one of the things I neglected to say in the introduction is that the film has been making the rounds at various film festivals in India, in the US, UK, I guess, and maybe other places. And has been doing pretty well and getting a fair bit of recognition. And I just wonder if there's anything to say about discussion of the film or reception of the film, also as mediated through social media, either in India or elsewhere.
Yeah. So it's interesting that the Facebook participants were largely from the younger generation who had the smartphones and things. And there was one comment when we were there where the elders, we got the impression that they felt a little bit left out in some sense because they weren't as au fait with social media as the young people are. So in a way it was great because that was the purpose, but it was also there was a little bit of leaving out of some people, some of the Naga communities. So when I made the film, my colleague in Delhi said to me, can you make sure that they all get the link? Because some of the old elderly people, or I don't know how old they are, but they won't have such, their children can show it to them on their phones, or they can get access through their children rather than, because they won't know how to see it otherwise, So that was a really, I thought, quite an interesting element that social media includes, but it also excludes parts of the community. So yeah, the request by the Zemi committee was that we extend the the idea of the Olympics and what they'd done beyond the boundaries of Nagaland in India. They're very excited that British people might be watching it, you know, or Americans. And at one point they asked me to narrate it. And I said, first of all, I've got a horrible accent. You wouldn't want me. But secondly, you don't want any, this is your story. You need to narrate it. And just in answer to the last question, I didn't script that. That was the script. So I asked the 3 narrators who narrated there to script that narrative. I didn't write any of that. That was all done by a Naga Zemi academic and Avi, who's my colleague from the University of Delhi. And she was very careful, you know, of how she, you know, what she said. You know, so she, but also they also, you know, wanted their names to be known, because remember, in museums around the world, often people look at Naga artifacts and see them frozen in time. They, you know, they look at these old, you know, fire making tools and, you know, all these, you know, organic artifacts, and there's no real sort of recognition that the Naga are very modern people, and they know how they might not have thoroughly industrialized cities or great roads, but they're technologically extremely just as the same as we are, you know. So there's almost like that leap from agricultural straight into the digital revolution. So there isn't that. So I think people will often get, and even the Indians I brought with me who are Indian, they're Indian as well, but you know, other people from other areas of India didn't realize how amazing and progressive and thought-provoking and organized, and remember, the Zemi see themselves as one of the groups of Nagas who have not done so well. You know, they do see themselves as lagging behind, but there is a lot of energy and youthful energy, and film and social media is one of the areas that they are very good at. So yeah, I hope I've answered that question. Yes, they wanted the film to go beyond. It wasn't like my hubris saying, oh, let's enter it. They said, please, can you enter it into festivals, put it wherever you can. We want people to know who we are and what we've done, and we would like it in museums because we'd like people to see what we do now, not what we did 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's reminding me of one other question, which I just had as an afterthought, but I supervise a few number of student projects, on small scale projects on digital aspects of digital research. And many of those are organized around events, actually, because events provide a fairly discrete point around which to gauge social media response. So I just wondered if you'd thought about that as well. I'm just thinking out loud here, but at the end of a day of Olympic competition and things, were people then on social media commentating about what happened during the day? And it just seems that could be potentially a rich secondary commentary
Of course.
experience, if you see. I'm also thinking a little bit about John McManus's work on fandom and the role of Facebook and football fandom, and just the way that this is what I don't think John McManus expected. But matter of fact, just an interesting background, he was one of the very first students that ever appeared at the OxDEG, one of the first seminars, and he came because he'd got this grant to do this research on I think it was Turkish football supporters. And when he got to the games, he was traveling around Europe, going to matches with the fans. He realized that Facebook had really transformed fandom completely. So the fans were there at the event, but they were also on Facebook all the time. And then when they weren't on there, they were, you know, on Facebook. So it had expanded fandom immensely and impacted sort of this online offline thing. So I just wondered if there was any scope for that.
Yep, absolutely. And talking about liminality as well, that's the action on the sidelines. It's not just, you know, next to the pitch. This is all going on in social media constantly throughout the games,
Right.
there's stuff being, but one of the things I had to say is, before I got a distributor, I've got a distributor now for this film, but before I had a distributor, I said, please don't post this on on YouTube, because if it's on YouTube, the distributor won't take it. So, and also we couldn't enter it into film festivals if it had already been seen on YouTube. So I had to be really, and this is why I was a bit hesitant at first, and there had to be this official, Jeremiah had to write up on the Facebook page, anyone who sees this, you are not to put this on YouTube. He had to kind of get it from the authoritative moment on Facebook, saying you will be found out, and you will be you will be punished if you put this. This is an official, because there was money put into this, and it was an official record. We didn't want it to just be blown away over YouTube. But yeah, that fandom, I'll just give you a tiny little story. On the last day we were there, an elderly Naga, Zemi Naga, appeared. A wonderful man, he must have been in his 70s, arrived, and he said, I've driven all night. I live in East Nagaland. I've driven overnight for 12 hours to meet you in person. And I was taken aback. I was exhausted by then. I was taken aback. He said, I've been watching you on Facebook over the last week, and when I saw that you'd come all the way from England to be here and do this, I thought I can make the journey to come and see you. And I said, oh, this is wonderful. What, in a way, what, not why, but this is what. And he said, I need to tell you a story that needs to go down on record, and I want you to record me telling it. And he told me a very interesting story, which I'll share with you another time, which I recorded to put the record straight about some headhunting matters 100 years ago. But, he was feeling completely guilty, and he unburdened himself onto me. But because he'd seen me streamed from his house, miles away up the mountain, he came in to give me other information, which is not obviously relevant to this film, but it was a really interesting moment of, wow, that wouldn't have happened without that Facebook streaming. That wouldn't have happened, and so there was this kind of semi-fame going on among the people who had participated, because it was the biggest thing that had happened to them. Not me, but them, the actual event.
Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you. That leads very nicely to Phyllis Ferguson's question from the chat, and she's asking about how you funded post-production.
Yeah, okay. So I edit. I work with an editor as well, who's my colleague and longtime friend. We work on workshops together. We've been together for 15 years. So I had all the files all organized day by day, camera by camera, event by event, in a very systematic, archived way, as you would expect from a museum anthropologist. And so I shared the material with my colleague, and we worked on it for after our main jobs, because we both work full-time as well. So we used to meet up in the evening online. He lives in Portugal or Holland, depending on where his work takes him. And we worked over the internet editing on any free night we had between May 2020 and September, October 2020. So we kind of pay each other in kind. I help him out, he helps me out. So we keep the price low. We don't sort of charge each other lots of money because we work on projects together. We collaborate.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions? It looks like not. Okay, can I ask everyone to switch their microphones on, and we'll give Alison a round of applause.
Thank you.
The nearest we can do.
Oh, bless you. Well, I'll expect a pint of beer when I come in to see you.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Normally at this point, we all go to the pub.
I know, I miss that. I miss that.
This is the real downside with this all.
Yeah.
And next, well, in 2 weeks' time is Cindy Lynn and I can't remember. I remember her name, but I can't remember what she's talking about. But we will be sending email around to everyone. But Alison, thanks. That was wonderful. Very
very much.
interesting to kind of have the juxtaposition between the film and your commentary on the making of it. So thank you. And yeah, see everyone in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.